So the primary reason why the numbers are high this year, and they've also been really high in the past decade, is that migrants, including refugees and other displaced people, they can't just buy a ticket and get on an airplane like we can and arrive in a safe country. Governments ban airlines from transporting genuine refugees. And as a result, refugees are forced to pay smugglers. And it's really difficult for smugglers to even provide safe passage because if they try to transport migrants and other refugees on a large, stable ship, that ship will probably be seized and confiscated by the Libyan government or the Tunisian government with funding and assistance from the EU. So refugees and other displaced people, they just don't have a safe way of arriving in Europe. And so they take unsafe journeys via smugglers who often have no way of safely transporting.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to understand why the vessels that they are setting off on seem to be perilous from the very beginning. This latest one seemed to have sunk just sort of within an hour of having left the coast of Tunisia. You know, you talk about the EU and the work that they're doing. They signed a very significant deal with Tunisia to try and stem the flow of these migrants, but it isn't proving to be a deterrent.
Yeah, so the agreement between the EU and Tunisia is to pay the Tunisian government to manage migration. And in Tunisia, that means primarily detaining migrants and deporting them to Libya and their home countries. Just in February, the Tunisian government announced that it was trying to decrease the number of migrants in Tunisia that were specifically from sub-Saharan Africa, because these migrants were making the country too African and not Arab enough. So it's an openly racist policy that the EU is now actively funding. And as a result, more and more migrants are fleeing Tunisia because of the conditions that are partly paid for by the EU. So it had the opposite effect of what the EU intends.
Yeah, which is, and I mean, the ethics of that deal alone are not really grappling with the issue that is being faced, which is just these people in very vulnerable situations just trying to get to a safe home.
Yeah, I mean, there were 18 people just 4 days ago that were found dead in the desert in Libya after having been deported by the Tunisian government. So of course, refugees who are living in Tunisia are going to try to find safer land in Europe.
Yeah.
And to completely continue to fund the Tunisian government's policy is just not a viable or humane solution.
One of the issues, of course, is that the influx of migrants is not necessarily evenly shared across Europe. Is that a problem that the EU has to grapple with?
I think it is. And there have been efforts in the past, in particular in 2015, when there were almost 1 million migrants, more than 1 million if you include all the asylum seekers arriving. There was the beginning of efforts to share the allocation of asylum. So some countries that had more money and a larger population, a stronger economy, would take more refugees or process more asylum claims. And smaller countries like Malta would be processing fewer asylum claims. But those talks simply broke down. And as a result, countries in the Mediterranean accept far more asylum seekers, or they have to process far more claims than other countries. And that just leads to more challenging conditions in these countries.
Yeah. In the UK, of course, they're also dealing with a very big influx, but they've done this rather unusual, controversial to a degree, the use of a barge to house migrants. How do you view this concept?
So the barge itself is incredibly unsafe. It was built to house 200, it wasn't built to house anybody really, the barge, but it was built to retrofit 222 individuals. And the government is attempting to house 500 individuals. And as a result, it's a death trap if a fire breaks out. It's extremely unsafe if a respiratory disease breaks out. So from health and safety perspectives, it's not a safe place to be. And it also means that a number of refugees, including those who have fled ISIS, fled the Taliban, fled violence that recently broke out in Sudan, will be forced to live in extremely closed quarters without a communal space in order to help rebuild some of the community ties they might have left behind, causing incredible anxiety and re-traumatizing a lot of those who have fled for their lives. So from health and safety, from a mental health perspective, this just isn't the right solution.
Yeah. And there has been quite a fair bit of criticism at the delays the UK government, sort of the barriers they're putting up, even processing these migrants. They say they're there on this barge while they consider their refugee claims. Are they genuinely trying to consider these claims?
Well, only about 13% of all asylum seekers who have arrived in the UK since 2018 have even had their claims heard. So people are going to be living on this barge for years and years and years. And not only is that inhumane, but it will also cost the taxpayer a lot of money that they could make if they allowed refugees to remain and work and pay taxes into the economy. So the solution is particularly humane given the massive backlog of asylum claims, which is partly the result of the government just not investing in looking at these individual applications and coming to a decision.
Yes, it's the deterrent policy that many countries, including Australia, have adopted to try and stem the flow, but certainly around Europe it doesn't seem to be happening. Is there a problem too that there remains quite a lot of opposition in the UK and across the EU, with even the sort of trend toward more right-wing politics as a result of migration?
So part of the problem is that more migrants arrive. They don't have their claims heard. Migrants are forced to live in France on the streets in tents, in the UK in a barge, without having any stable employment because they can't legally work. And so people get frustrated that there's so many migrants arriving, but they're not working. And they're not working because their claims aren't heard and they can't get work visas. And that makes people even more upset about migration and stems the far right rhetoric. So it's this vicious cycle that continues as the government just doesn't invest in hearing people's claims and giving them the rights that they ought to be given.
Yeah. Really great to talk to you, Mollie. Thank you very much.